I had a caller who was, wondering, well, what about the thing with Pope Benedict when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger, and he was talking about the future of the church? I want to make sure I get to that too. So why don't we dive into that right now? If you have a comment or question, here's my number, 888-914-9149. Let me share with you some of the things that he said. This was in 1969. He was doing a radio broadcast in Germany, and he was asked if he would offer his predictions. What will the church look like in the future? So, he's doing a radio show like this one, and he's the guest, and he's asked this question. So he starts off this way. Now, keep in mind, he was nowhere near being pope yet. So as far as he was concerned, he was going to serve the church and then retire into obscurity and play the piano and all the nice things that he does. He's a dear man, if you ask me. I really, really like Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. Really, really like him. He said this. He said, "The future of the church can and will issue from those whose roots are deep and who live from the pure fullness of their faith." Now, please understand, he's talking not just to you and me, he's talking about us. And ask yourself as I go through this is going to carry us over this quick time out, and then we'll do some phone calls. Ask yourself, to what extent is he actually describing you, or to what extent is he describing the person that you should be? I think those are two interesting ways of looking at this. So just to start over again, it says, "The future of the church can and will issue from those whose roots are deep and who will live from the pure fullness of their faith. It will not issue from those who accommodate themselves merely to the passing moment, or from those who merely criticize others and assume that they themselves are infallible measuring rods. Nor will the future of the church issue from those who take the easier road, who sidestep the passion of faith, declaring false and obsolete, tyrannous and legalistic, all that makes demands upon men that hurts them and compels them to sacrifice themselves." Now he's talking there about when you have to do the right thing, and the right thing involves suffering. People who shrink back from that, he says, the future of the church is not with them. Now he has more to say. Some of it's actually dramatic. I'm sharing with you some predictions that the future Pope Benedict XVI made when he was still a cardinal. This was on a radio program in Germany in 1969. And I just want you to think about what he's saying here. The first part of it that I quoted before the break had to do with the different people who are not the future of the church. He talked about people who are not willing to suffer, or people who assume that they themselves are infallible. They make the decisions for the church, or people who criticize all the time, or people who simply go along to get along. He says these are the people who accommodate themselves merely to the passing moment. So he gives all those, it's not going to be this group or that group. And he's not knocking people. He's just talking about attitudes and things. Then he goes on to say, to put this more positively, the future of the church, once again, as always, will be reshaped, by saints. By men and women, that is, whose minds probe deeper than the slogans of the day. Think about what he's saying here. This is 1969. Who probe deeper than the slogans of the day, who see more than others see, because their lives embrace a wider reality. Unselfishness, which makes men free, is attained only through the patience of small daily acts of self-denial. By this daily passion, which alone reveals to a man in how many ways he is enslaved by his own ego, by this daily passion, and by it alone, a man's eyes are slowly opened. He sees only to the extent that he has lived and suffered. If today we are scarcely able any longer to become aware of God, that is because we find it so easy to evade ourselves, to flee from the depths of our being by means of the narcotic of some pleasure or other. This is top shelf. I got to reread that last sentence. I've read and reread this commentary by Cardinal Ratzinger, and every time I read it, there's just more there. He says, this alone, this daily passion, these daily acts of self-denial, reveals to a man in how many ways he is enslaved by his own ego, by this daily passion, and by it alone, a man's eyes are slowly opened. He sees only to the extent that he has lived and suffered. If today we are scarcely able any longer to become aware of God, that is because we find it so easy to evade ourselves, to flee from the depths of our being by means of the narcotic of some pleasure or other. He's talking about sex. He's talking about alcohol. He's talking about drugs. He's talking about losing yourself endlessly for hours on end on Facebook. He's talking about pornography. He's talking about gadgets. He's talking about infotainment. He's talking about endless sports. You see what he's talking about? When he talks about the narcotic of some pleasure or other, he's saying we are self-medicating in our culture in such a way that we are now numb to our connection deep down in our souls with God. He continues, thus our own interior depths remain closed to us. If it is true that a man can see only with his heart, then how blind we are. How does all this affect the problem we are examining, he says? It means that the big talk of those who prophesy a church without God and without faith is all empty chatter. We have no need of a church that celebrates the cult of action in political prayers. This is Cardinal Ratzinger I'm quoting from. This is from a radio interview in 1969. Michael and Tracy, please be patient. I'm going to come to you here very shortly. Let me continue. It is utterly superfluous. Therefore, it will destroy itself. What will remain is the Church of Jesus Christ, the church that believes in the God who has become man and promises us life beyond death. The kind of priest who is no more than a social worker can be replaced by the psychotherapist and other specialists, but the priest who is no specialist, who does not stand on the sidelines watching the game, giving official advice, but in the name of God places himself at the disposal of man, who is beside them in their sorrows and their joys, in their hope and in their fear, such a priest will certainly be needed in the future. Let us go a step farther, he says. From the crisis of today, the church of tomorrow. This is where it gets dramatic, if you ask me. Listen to these words. From the crisis of today, this is 1969. From the crisis of today, the church of tomorrow will emerge, a church that has lost much. She will become small and will have to start afresh more or less from the beginning. She will no longer be able to inhabit many of the edifices she built in prosperity. He's talking about the big buildings. As the number of her adherents diminishes, so it will lose many of her social privileges. In contrast to an earlier age, it will be seen, referring to the church, much more as a voluntary society entered only by free decision. As a small society, the church will make much bigger demands on the initiative of her individual members. Undoubtedly, the church will discover new forms of ministry and will ordain to the priesthood approved Christians who pursue some profession. He's referring to those who might, be worker priests or something like that. He says, in many smaller congregations or self-contained social groups, pastoral care will normally be provided in this fashion. Alongside this, the full-time ministry of the priesthood will be indispensable as formerly. But in all the changes at which one might guess, the church will find her essence afresh and with full conviction, and that which was always at her center, faith in the triune God, in Jesus Christ, the Son of God made man, in the presence of the Spirit until the end of the world. In faith and prayer, she will again recognize the sacraments as the worship of God and not as a subject for liturgical scholarship. Last bit I'm going to read to you. He says, the church will be a more spiritual church, not presuming upon a political mandate, flirting as little with the left as with the right. It will be hard going for the church, for the process of crystallization and clarification will cost her much valuable energy. It will make the church poor and cause her to become the church of the meek. The process will be all the more arduous, for sectarian narrow-mindedness as well as pompous self-will will have to be shed. One may predict that all of this will take time. The process will be long and wearisome, as was the road from the false progressivism on the eve of the French Revolution, when a bishop might be thought smart if he made fun of dogmas and even insinuated that the existence of God was by no means certain. But when the trial of this sifting is past, a great power will flow from a more spiritualized and simplified Catholic Church. Men in a totally planned world will find themselves unspeakably lonely. If they have completely lost sight of God, they will feel the whole horror of their poverty. Then they will discover the little flock of believers as something wholly new. They will discover it as a hope that is meant for them, an answer for which they have always been searching in secret. And so, this is his final sentence, he says, and so it seems certain to me that the church is facing very hard times. The real crisis has scarcely begun. We will have to count on terrific upheavals. but I am equally certain about what will remain at the end. Not the church of the political cult, which is already dead, but the church of faith. It may well no longer be the dominant social power to the extent that she was until recently, but it will enjoy a fresh blossoming and be seen as man's home, where he will find life and hope beyond death. Bingo bango. I don't know how to say that in German. It boggles the mind how accurate his prediction was. We're going to post a link to that. I want you to read it and reread it and think about it.